Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the migrant crisis unfolding in Europe. According to the United Nations, some 2,500 refugees have already died this year trying to make their way to Europe as they flee war and dire economic conditions in the Middle East and North Africa. Joining us now from Berlin is Josef Janning. He is a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Also joining us from London is Sukant Chandan. He is a political analyst and writer. Welcome to both of you to the show. Josef, Germany has opened its doors to hundreds of thousands of refugees. How is the German response being seen in the country?
Well, so far the response is welcome. We have seen a number of acts of violence against migrants, against migrant or designated refugee centers, and that has alerted the population. So people are very much aware now that they are watched, and they want to create a positive image. They want to let people come into this country know that they are welcome. This is not something that's going to last forever, but for the moment, it kind of carries the day.
Sukant, why are we seeing this migrant crisis right now? Does it have anything to do with the fact that Middle Eastern and North African countries were bombed by the United States and its NATO allies?
Well, indeed, Anand, we can go back to the British and Yankee war of invasion, occupation and destruction, frankly, of Afghanistan in 2001, and we can go decades back of direct British and US involvement there in destroying the formerly quite progressive and stable socialist PDPA government. But more recently, British, French and US states have directly teamed up exactly with the lynchers, the rapists, the sexual enslavers and the people traffickers who were all promoted and spun as rebels and revolutionaries in the Arab Spring, nay, perhaps the Arab Sting in Libya and now in Syria. So it was actually the destruction of Libya, one of the most prosperous and stable countries in all of the African continent, which really precipitated and promoted this people trafficking and this total divide and ruin and destruction strategy by the West. So indeed, this so-called refugee crisis has been directly facilitated and manufactured by London, Paris, and Washington.
Josef, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel is calling on other European countries to step up to the plate and do more to help out the refugees. There's even been talk of a quota system being implemented right now. What would she like to see?
Well, to be sure, Germany has resisted a quota system years ago when it was already under discussion. But now that the country is affected so heavily, the idea is to have a fair burden sharing of refugees arriving in the EU, because the border countries themselves are already overburdened. Their capacities do not match the need. So it would be smart and wise and politically necessary to create reception centers for new arrivals also in other member states, whereas refugees, once they have been recognized and granted permanent stay, they should be allowed to travel freely inside the European Union.
Sukant, what do you make of the British response to this crisis so far?
Britain directly lobbied and successfully lobbied the Italian authorities for entering Mare Nostrum, which was the Italian search and rescue mission in the Mediterranean Sea. Britain stopped that and in so doing sent many thousands of people to their deaths into the Mediterranean Sea after having destroyed Libya in the first place, as I mentioned. The contradiction between the British and German governments are interesting. Now, all of Europe needs 31 million new influx of people to actually deal with the crisis of demographics, etc. I mean, Germany has a crisis, it's an aging population. So actually, aside from the politicking that is going on, the racism or the welcoming or both, perhaps, Germany needs this very skilled labor coming into Europe as a result of the war and destruction of leading NATO policy over there.
Josef, what is the long-term outlook for this crisis? I mean, are we going to see this flow of migrants from North Africa, from the Middle East to Germany continue for perhaps years ahead?
Well, certainly the migratory pressure will continue because there is no end to the conflicts inside that drives actually people away from their homes. On the other hand, I cannot see that Europe will be in this kind of exceptionalism mode of receiving and welcoming large numbers of refugees for years. So I think it is absolutely necessary that Europeans engage more in dealing with refugees closer to the regions of conflict. This is something that they have been failed to do They should have been there early on with massive help, with medical help, with nutrition, with providing schooling to children in their own language in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and should be supporting these countries much more because they take the largest share of the migrant population. The most coming to Europe is a tiny fraction measured against the total number of refugees.
Sukant, I want to get back to one of those countries that you mentioned, that I mentioned rather, that was bombed by NATO, and that's Libya. In many instances, we hear that Libya has been labeled a failed state. This is a country which was bombed extensively by the United States and its NATO allies. I mean, what we're seeing now, it's an inevitable result of that.
No, absolutely. I think the British state and the leading NATO powers that were engaged in the destruction of Libya, allied to their death squad forces on the ground, knew exactly what was going on. And Muammar Gaddafi said himself in March 2011, that there will be a crisis of migration, etc., and everything that he said has come to pass. But I think it's interesting. Our colleague in Germany is talking about a humanitarian intervention post this project of divide and ruin and destruction by Europe, allied to death squads in Libya and now Syria. Why not defend Syrian sovereignty and independence? Why not have defended Libyan sovereignty and independence? Why are we facilitating the destruction of these important global south countries under the cloak, under the disingenuous cloak of a so-called Arab Spring? No, I think it's very important that places like Libya and Syria, who before this crisis, which was manufactured by the leading NATO powers, that we defend their social and political and cultural gains, that we defend the stability and not manufacture and join in destabilizing and then bemoaning the situation and bemoaning humanitarian intervention post the actual destruction of these countries.
Josef, do you want to respond to that? These countries in NATO, the accusation is that they destroyed countries like Libya and Syria. So they are reaping the benefits now of what they caused.
Well, I don't share that view. First of all, I think the Arab Spring has not been manufactured by the West, but is a result of the rather poor state of governance in the countries of the region. And I have no sympathy for the quality of the dictatorships in Libya, Iraq, or Syria. Although, I accept the point that there are follow-on effects. When the United States chose to overthrow Saddam Hussein in Iraq, they did not properly reflect the consequences that this could have, and actually the many conflicts it triggered thereafter. So I'm not in the defense of such measures. I don't think that military intervention to oust governments and overthrow governments is the right thing to do. But we should not forget that we're not talking about prosperous, stable, legitimate countries here, but rather we're talking about some rather ruthless dictatorships, which have provided stability, which also have provided some protection to ethnic minorities, which now that they are weak or gone, has broken apart. But nevertheless, that doesn't make them rather acceptable or legitimate governments in the first place.
Okay, Josef, what do you make of the fact that many of the migrants are Muslim? Is this fueling even more Islamophobia in Europe from some quarters? Could this perhaps further fuel the rise of the far right in Europe?
Yes, it may. I think there has to be special attention paid to this. Integration of people staying in Europe has to give this a particular effort and devote resources to it, because otherwise it's the very simple narrative of populists, that those with the wrong faith, with the wrong ethnicity, those who have come, they are to be blamed for everything that goes wrong. So one has to counter this. It seems that this has been understood, because it's no new issue in Europe. It has been understood, particularly in countries such as Austria, Germany, Scandinavia. It may be a bit more difficult in places like Hungary, where there is no previous record of immigration, where we have a country of immigration now, for the first time in its recent history, being in a situation of receiving larger flows of migration of a different ethnicity and a different faith.
Sukant, what do you make of that?
Well, whether there would be this so-called refugee crisis or not, the rise of racism across the West has been rampant for generations, and it's been increasing as we've been entering into this economic crisis post-2008. We can see Britain and Germany playing this ridiculous game with each other. Obviously, there's a subtext to the politicking and the dispute between the administrations of Britain and Germany. Britain still allows many refugees and immigrants into Britain. Some come illegally, some come legally, because Britain's economy needs to be serviced by this cheap and skilled labor anyway. You go into the hospitals, the schools, the old people's homes. Who's looking after and teaching all these people? It's our people from Africa and Asia. Now, I'd just like to make a point as well. You know, Nazism also invaded and destroyed and occupied countries. And also the Nazis went into the concentration camps where they were keeping Jews and other people and showed, actually, we're not treating these people so bad, we're actually respecting them. Isn't there a parallel here today where people in Europe, such as our guest in Germany, are defining what is dictatorship and what is this and what is that, and justifying the destruction of the societies, and then patronizing the same refugees as the result of justifying the very destruction of these sovereign, independent global South countries? No, this is the same white supremacy, European fascism and Nazism that we're seeing emerge right across the West. It's an alarming situation, and people, particularly of the global South, should take note and understand how our people are being manipulated. Syria is being destroyed. Syria is being emptied of its people. Europe is welcoming these people, and it's developing this vicious cycle again and again and again with country after country. It's unacceptable.
Josef, Chancellor Angela Merkel has said, according to the BBC, that the flow of migrants into Europe will occupy and change the country in the coming years. What does she mean by that?
Well, let me first of all say I disagree sharply with what my colleague from London has said, and I think the Nazi analogy is just not acceptable, at least from my point of view. I think a massive, significant inflow of migrants who are going to stay in the country will change the composition of society, will bring migrants to parts of the country, particularly in the east of Germany, where there are little so far, will require more and more Germans to understand that the reality of this society is not its traditional ethnic understanding of citizenship, but a more civic understanding of citizenship, of shared space, shared civic obligations and rights. So I think that's a cultural challenge. It seems that people are open to it. It is not necessarily going to be a success without effort.
And that's where we have to leave it, gentlemen. Thanks to both of you for joining us. That is it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at @CCTV_America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.